As much as we'd like him to. We just, yeah, so Drow's not going to be here, unfortunately. But hopefully we don't need him for this episode. Intro to Kink should be good, I think. And yeah, so I don't know, we'll jump right into it. There's not Intro to Kink, I think, is pretty basic to me. I mean, I always say the foundations were knowledge, communication, and boundaries. So to me, I would kind of go about approaching kink in the same way, whether or not you're getting ready to try and find something in person or not, or whether you don't really just know much about kink at all or anything like that, or you're not really sure what you're going to be into. To me, I think you get a firm foundation in what's available, what's out there, what's possible by doing a buttload of research. Now, I'm not saying go read 50 Shades of Grey or watch the movie and then be like, oh, this is a healthy relationship. This is the information I need. No. Don't limit yourself just to fiction. Don't limit yourself to just one source. There's
porn.
Yeah.
Do not just watch porn.
Yeah, because that's very unrealistic. But yeah. there's actual medical research into different kinks. There's just sociological research into kinks. And then there's just information, tons and tons of information compiled by people that are just members of the community. And I'm not saying don't read fiction and stuff about it. That's a good way maybe to somehow discover something you might not have realized, or see something in a different light than you thought it was. And obviously just consume information would be my number one, right? And before you ever talk to anyone, before you ever try and go find an in-person event, which to me is maybe like the last thing you do getting involved in the kink community, is start attending events really in person. But you gotta have that knowledge beforehand. You can't cook a meal if you don't know what ingredients that you want for that meal, what ingredients you need for that meal. Yeah. And so yeah,
I would say also with that analogy, sometimes you just know you have these ingredients and you have to figure out what you can make with them. So if you are suddenly becoming aware that I might be kind of into being choked, or I'm kind of enjoying, being spanked, and you're thinking you want to get into the spicier side of things, you can also very much move in this way. Like, hey, these are the things I'm into. How is that represented in the kink community? What would be the things that I would ask for? And there are ways to go about looking that up to see, with those interests, like what might be available within the kink community for you. And the reality is you can really fit a lot of these things that you might have figured out you were into by accident into many different types of kinks.
And don't be afraid, to adjust those viewpoints on what you've learned and what you think later too, because especially once you start getting involved with other people, start involving other people, your view on things are going to change. You're going to learn new ways of doing things, doing the same things, with other people and stuff like that. So, you might be like, oh, I like getting choked. And then you're going to meet 5 different people who are all going to choke you in different ways and enjoy doing different things, or apply it in different situations and stuff like that. So just because, you have an idea in your head of what you'd like, which is great. Fully support that. Please have that before you go in.
Starting basis. Perfectly good starting basis. But you like this.
Right. But don't be afraid that, of trying out new things involving that, trying it in a different way and stuff like that, because those things will change. But Google's a friend to you here to get information. I do hardly recommend reading fiction about things, because, fictions can be a great launching point to people getting interested in finding out different things. So definitely do read some fiction. Don't be totally inimical to it. 50 Shades of Grey might be the most popular example of kink, but there's plenty of other examples of kink out there in fiction that are great.
Very much.
So that's a great stepping point. But yeah, Google's your friend. Just there's an entire websites, hundreds of them, just devoted to different specific kinks, all the way up to specific fetishes and stuff. And they're all of that information is out there to look at. And before you do anything else, like I said, I think you should have that grounding in like just kind of an awareness of what a specific thing is that you might be interested in, the different ways that it might be experienced, and so what. Just so you have some kind of grounding in reality to when you move on to other things. And once you have that grounding in knowledge, you gotta kind of, well, I mean, I guess it's not necessarily not engaging in the kink community if you never really engage someone else, because there are things you can do entirely by your own. People self-tie. Autoerotic asphyxiation is a thing, though that's super dangerous. But like you can,
that is probably the worst example of things to start with.
It is, but no. I'm not saying start with that. I'm just saying that there's a lot of things in kink that you can just experience, on your own time. Doing it by yourself.
You do not ever need a partner if you don't want a partner. There are perfectly happy ace individuals who have never had a partner, who have no interest in anything sexual, that are perfectly happy to engage in BDSM behaviors at home. There are self impacts, which are perfectly valid. There are self ties within shibari. There are all sorts of singular person BDSM activities to engage in, which can meet your needs without having to have a partner if that's not something you want.
Take that little self-care trip to the sex shop when you got some time.
Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Look into things that you could try on your own to see if you're into it. If like you think you might be into shibari, you can always practice self-ties. And if you decide that's not something you're into, then you don't have to do it anymore.
Yeah, and I highly recommend, doing as much as you can by yourself first, just to get yourself kind of used to the idea of, what that might feel like physically. And then also have an idea in your head. It's like, oh, I'd kind of like it if someone was doing this when XYZ, blah, 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 blah. But also because, before you move on from, just learning about things and Googling things and reading things and thinking about it, before you do anything with anyone else, even if it's just a one-on-one thing, you have to be able to communicate what you want safely and healthily with the other person. We've talked about this, I think, a lot over the different episodes, but it's especially important here. And you're gonna be new. If you're new to this, you're obviously gonna be new in doing things with other people, right? Say you've read all the books, you've read all the websites, you've watched a lot of things, and like, I'm ready to experience this with someone else, right? Well, you have to be able to communicate with them. Hey, I'm new. If I want to stop right in the middle of this, you have to be comfortable with that, because maybe I find out I don't like this, actually in person.
And we need to very much so communicate that it is totally okay to get into a scene and realize, wow, I really don't like degradation, or holy shit, I'm really not as into being spanked as I thought, and this is too much for me. That is entirely valid. And nobody who is a safe partner will discourage you from speaking out and saying, hey, I'm not having a good time anymore.
Yeah, it can totally be the opposite too. You can totally go, oh, I feel like I'm loving this a lot more than I thought I would. Let's do more of this. Yep. So we have to change what the scene is, change what your expectations are, change what you want to do. But you have to be able to openly communicate that, hey, I'm new here, and I'm going to be learning, what I like alongside doing things, because there's nothing, and like you said, there's nothing wrong with that. And no one should hold that against you. No one should ever be like, oh, you're new. You should
never, ever, ever within BDSM especially be afraid to advocate for yourself if you are not having a good time. And this person's just really going off, degrading you and telling you that you have the worst mom ever, or something. It's something that's really weird. You're not into it. Tell them. People do things different ways. And I'm not really big into degradation myself, but some of the degradation I've heard has made me really just arch an eyebrow and go, what the fuck? Like, this is weird. I don't see how anyone gets off on this, but that's what they get off on.
And especially if you ever feel like you can't communicate successfully for some reason, whether you're just, frustrated or you're scared or something like that, just turn around and leave. Just leave. Just leave immediately. Just be done with it.
Yes.
It's all right. There's a million fishes in the seas. There's plenty of opportunity.
Sometimes you just have to say, I can't do this right now, and leave. And if you have a partner who is safe, they won't need more than this.
Yep.
If they respect you and your boundaries and your consent, they'll be like, okay, can I get you a drink to go? Do you want a bottle of water or something on your way out the door? Like, they will be supportive of your decision to leave if they are a safe partner.
And hopefully, because this is a good thing to transition to, I do think, when you're first getting into it, actually with someone else, I do think trying to stick with, very small situations, find like a partner or a series of singular partners, whichever you prefer. Just one-on-one occasions.
Hmm.
Anything that you can explore one-on-one, which is most things. Find a partner you're comfortable with, and then be like, hey, I want to try XYZ. I want to try this. I'm really interested in this. Just
Hmm.
be able to communicate that with them, but don't jump into any kind of group situations. Don't jump into just going straight to events and stuff like that. Try and find someone to explore this with, in a much smaller scale. You don't want to overwhelm yourself. You don't want to. There's so much information, so much stuff out there. You're much better off finding someone, in my opinion, who you can just experiment with, on
Yes.
your own time for a little while.
Someone who you trust.
Yeah, that should be a
Specifically.
given. Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody who you trust, who you know has your best interest in heart and wants to help you explore these things. And that's the best way to go about it. You don't want to hop into things. You don't want to get on Tinder and look for a partner who's, interested in choking. That I would not recommend this. Do not start asking people on dating apps within the first couple of days of talking, like how into choking they are. That's how you end up with, some sort of weird serial killer in your bedroom. We
No,
want to make sure you have a good established level of trust before we start talking about these things.
yeah, preferably you want to find someone you know is a safe partner to begin with, even if you're just being totally
Yeah.
vanilla, and that way that, hey, maybe I can trust this person, doing things that aren't totally vanilla. You know what I mean?
I
Like,
want to be very clear that we're talking about, finding somebody, but we're not talking about getting on Tinder and having a hookup with somebody who's
yes,
maybe
very
into these things. Because there is no degree of vetting that you will have been able to accomplish in that narrow of a window to know if it's safe to engage in these activities with this person, especially when you were so new. Being so new makes you extremely vulnerable to the manipulation and predatory nature of some of these people who are looking for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, who they can take advantage of. Some of these people especially love potential new subs who are learning how things work so they can manipulate you into what kind of sub they want. I've talked about this
and twist and turn you.
several times. I've talked about this several times. I look deceptively young for my age. Doms often assume that I am very young. Therefore, they will say things to me, believing me to be a very young 18, 19-year-old girl with limited experience, not realizing that I am not, in fact, that young, and I am, in fact, quite a bit more experienced than they likely are. And I'm going to see what they're saying and realize that that is a fucking predator. I've had men message me telling me that they want to take care of me. They're a daddy dom and I wouldn't have to do anything. And really what they're telling me is they want a 24/7 slave dynamic where I would not be allowed to do anything, not even think for myself. I would have no financial freedom and I would just be their at-home sex slave is what I was being told. But as somebody who is established in kink, I was able to see that's what it was. But when you're coming into the scene, you may not know what some of these buzzwords are or what the implications of, you wouldn't even have to think at all. Well, that's telling you he wants you to be no brain, empty head, no thought, just sex 24/7. There were buzzwords there, but if you're new to the scene or you're a child who is just now getting into the scene, you will not necessarily be familiar with this. So you have to be very, very cautious when you get into conversations with these people and be very cautious with what they say right off the bat.
Yeah, and
not everyone in the scene.
That might be where you end up
safe.
as a 24/7, slave to someone. Maybe that's what you think you want, but you can't know that until you've actually had that experience to go out and explore. And if someone just tries to push you into that, yeah, you should run the other way.
Never start as a 24/7 slave to anybody. That is not a safe way to start. And that is not a safe place for most people to be until they know for sure this is something that they personally want. And it takes a lot more than I have a fantasy about this to establish that's something you actually want. This is a very, very big commitment. It's a very, very trust heavy commitment. And the predatory capacity within this type of dynamic is huge. Never let anyone talk you into doing this kind of thing right off the bat. This is not something that you should be getting into with a partner that you've only been dating for a couple of months either. This should be somebody that you have an established rapport with and you feel safe bringing it to that level.
Yeah,
It should never start that way.
maybe the best way to put it is like don't do anything with anyone. Don't let anyone ever push you into something. You know, especially someone who's new and exploring. You should always be doing
Yeah.
that on your terms. Generally, like it's one thing
I
for
will
someone to
also
like come up with a
add,
suggestion, be like, "Would you like to do this?" And you go like, "I'd like to try
oh,
that, sure." But it's
I would
entirely another if they're like, "No, we
argue,
have to do."
I would argue strongly that certain things would never even be brought up by somebody who has your best interest at heart. Nobody who knows that you are new to the scene should or would, no rational person would even suggest a 24/7 dynamic to you when you are just learning about power exchange. Like nobody in their right mind would suggest that if they had your best interest at heart, because those of us who have experience with this type of power exchange know that this is a huge commitment, and no person just getting into the scene should ever even be suggested this until they've had a scene where there's power exchange, and then they've lengthened it out to like an hour or 2 hours or for a day or an extended scene just to have that experience. It's never something you should jump to. Just like you never want your first experience to be CNC. That's a really bad idea. Don't do that. You need to make sure that these people who are trying to help acclimate you to the community and to BDSM or to concept BDSM, no one should be starting you with something that is extreme. Total power exchange, it should not happen at all until you're well established to know what you're into. CNC especially, there's a lot of elements of CNC that you can try before you get into an actual CNC scene, and you should definitely be trying those things before you get to a CNC scene. This is a huge step and can be extremely traumatic. Things like total power exchange, CNC, these are things that even some experienced kinksters are leery about and won't engage in, or at least they won't engage in until they've been established with a partner for a long time and there's a huge level of trust built there. Nobody who
Yeah.
is just introduced you to the scene, who is safe, will suggest these things as a trial run. They just won't.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and I guess maybe it's a good time to slightly segue. I mean, and the next step then would be, to me, I would phrase it as finding a community, which is probably the broadest possible way to say it. And this includes online communities. This includes finding in-person events and small groups of people, you know, in your area that do things like this. But the reason why I bring this up is because there is, so some people don't find it super easy to find a partner, especially super easy to talk to random people who they meet in vanilla situations about this kind of thing, even if they do end up, you know, being a partner. You know, say you went on a couple dates, you've been going out with someone for a couple weeks, then, you know, but it's purely vanilla. Some people find it really hard to then bring up, hey, I want to be kinky. So for some people, and this is maybe an addendum to finding a partner in a small situation. Maybe you can do this alongside that. The great thing about online communities and doing things online is that it's kind of all within your power, right? Something bad, you can just turn off your computer, walk away. There's nothing forcing you to sit there and chat with someone online. And if you're having troubles finding a partner, you could slightly skip a step, you know, find something online, find something anonymous. There's tons of things on Discord you can go look at. I'm not the biggest fan of FetLife for actually ever talking to anyone. Never was.
Yeah.
Because that, like, I think you said in the last episode, it's pretty much the Wild West, and that's very
Yeah.
very accurate summation of that site. But and anything that allows you to, I don't want to say be anonymous, but have the easiest possible time of cutting the cord and walking away from a situation. You know, all of
Mm-hmm.
that can be helpful. And, you know, and you can still do things online, you know, try things out, you know, in text, via voice, video, and stuff like that, and see if you like certain situations. And, you know, it's still something that you can just like hang up the phone or, you know, close the app and walk away from. And there isn't, you know, a pressure to maintain, you know, that relationship unless, you know, you want to, meaning if someone does turn out to be a creep, you can just cancel, you know, everything really fucking easily and get out of that. So if you're having problems finding a partner, or maybe you don't feel comfortable finding a partner in person first, you could, you know, start checking out some of those communities online that make it easier to do that. Um, to me, I would even do that. You know, even if you did find a partner one on one, and you're comfortable and you're starting to explore that, before doing anything else in person, like large group events and munches and stuff like that, I would still, go online, find other communities, find other people to talk to,
Yes.
expand your horizons when it comes to connections, I guess would be the way to say that. Find other people in the community that you can chat with, anonymously, and be like, hey, and just chat about stuff and learn about stuff. A lot of kink discords will have sections dedicated to like information and stuff like that. I can't remember what
Yes.
yours was called, Mouse, what your
Classroom.
channel was called.
We have
Classroom.
a classroom. Yeah. Classrooms for asking questions, classroom. Sometimes we'll post resources there. Since we've revamped the server, we have not actually posted a whole lot of resources in there yet. But we have a section called Classroom, which is dedicated to answering kink related questions. And this is essential in every kink server because the reality is there's a lot going on in kink. And even some of us who have a lot of experience still need to ask questions sometimes. Sometimes it's just a scenario you haven't gotten into before and you just need clarification. And a community is a really important thing to have this fallback. Sometimes you're not comfortable with the situation, you're not sure it's normal, and you kind of just want to say, hey guys, so I was asked to do this and it made me feel super uncomfortable and I feel like I might be pushing consent. What do you guys think? Sometimes you need to hear that feedback from other people to go, oh, holy shit, that's not good. Or, well, it's controversial, but it does happen in the scene. And as long as it's done safely, it can be okay. Like that is the kind of situation where it is really, really nice to have a community of people who is experienced enough to be able to answer your questions before you get hurt.
Yep, and there's communities like that all over the place. I mean, there's
There are.
Facebook groups dedicated to stuff like that. Like
Yeah,
it's not,
I run a Facebook page, and honestly, some of the anonymous questions I get are actually dedicated to answering these types of questions. Or I've had this situation going on with my partner. I'm not sure this is safe. What do you think about this? I get questions like that surprisingly often. Sometimes I wish I had more context to know more about it, but people do ask questions like this quite often because it is part of kink is there is just a general taboo nature to a lot of it, and therefore people don't discuss it, and it's very difficult to get these questions answered unless you are in a very specific setting, and these groups are the setting where it's usually easiest to get answers.
and I again, if you don't feel comfortable yet finding a partner, I think a lot of these communities, a lot of these places, online that you can go to join, that kind of community rather than something, in person, can
Mm-hmm.
be a middle step instead of, just jumping straight into it
Yeah.
with a partner
if
because
if you are the type of person who may or may not even want a partner or doesn't want to rush getting into a partner but wants to explore kink anyway, these communities are a great way to start. Get on Facebook, find some communities or pages that are discussing things that you like and watch. You may find out the person you followed is not a good person in the community, but generally speaking, you can work that out and move on pretty fast. Not everyone in the community is reputable, not everyone in the community is safe. And the nice part about community is, generally speaking, there's going to be somebody there to tell you, like, oh, that guy you were talking to, he does have a reputation for ignoring consent when he feels like it.
yeah, and even if you don't really want to engage with any other individuals online like that, you
Mm-hmm.
can still live vicariously through the other people that are talking about it
Oh,
and going through it
yeah.
and are part of that community, themselves. So it doesn't even have to be
Mm-hmm.
about you. You could just read, what other people are saying, what other people are talking about,
Oh,
and
yeah.
listen to their experiences and what they're going through, and that can also be a great way to like learn and how to spot a lot of red flags because that's a lot of the reasons why a lot of people go to those communities is to talk about like, hey, is this okay, is this not okay, this is what's happening, and then you can get some really good advice on finding out what's happening to them and what people are telling them and stuff like that. So it's just a great resource all around.
Wholehearted agree. It's just, I would say, starting with finding a partner, it's not something that I would do. When I was first getting into kink, the reason I got into it, the first thing that I realized is I was really bored by slow, quote unquote, love making. I was really bored by partners who thought they were being slow and passionate. They were boring the living hell out of me. And I kept having to ask, can't you be a little rougher? And I realized, well, how rough do I actually want it? And through a little bit of research, I found out, oh, okay, so there is actually a community that I would fit in a lot better than, partners who want to quote unquote make love. I find that to be the dullest shit out there. I don't want that. So I ended up having to figure out what I wanted and eventually find partners who were able to and willing to quote unquote provide that service to me. Not the best way to phrase it, but it was something that I realized that I was missing something. And through trial and error, I was able to figure out what that was missing. And I have, from that time, slowly expanded my sexual repertoire until I found out what I wanted, what I enjoy. And now I am running a page to help explain kink and answer kink questions to others, because it is something that can be hard to navigate, especially if you are a shy person or you're somebody who doesn't like to talk to people as much. Social media groups can be an excellent way to do that with the at least illusion of anonymity. I am a real person, but I am hiding behind a screen. Therefore, people feel a little bit more comfortable talking to me because they don't actually have that face to face. They are seeing me as a page. I am just mouse, and I am willing to answer questions. And that does make it a little bit more accessible for some people who have some issues with shyness, but they still want to learn. And you don't have to have a partner to learn. And that's a very important thing to understand, is you need a partner for some of the experiences, not all of them, some of them, but you don't have to have a partner to get into kink. You can still enjoy kink on your own. And some people, many people, have perfectly satisfying experiences and don't need a partner to enjoy kink. It's always an option to explore by yourself. And I think that it is the best option, the best way to start.
Yep. And that's certainly valid.
I say this coming from the perspective of somebody who is demi as well. Like, for me, if I would have had to wait for a partner to explore kink, it would have taken me a long time to get there, because I just, when I do have partners, usually I am not necessarily with them to explore things. I'm with them because that's what I was into at the time with them, and I'm not here to change them. So if my partner is vanilla, then I'll be vanilla temporarily. And I eventually found out that I'm not into that. I can't really fake being vanilla anymore. So I'm no longer looking for vanilla relationships. And you will determine over time what you're able to enjoy or not. And once I got a certain level of kink in my system, I realized I can't go back to vanilla. I can't pretend that vanilla is okay for me anymore. It's just boring at this point.
You've been corrupt. You've been tainted.
Literally. In fact, that is a whole kink. Corruption is an entire kink for people.
Yes, it is. That's very true. But I have that same, because I'm demi myself, and my first relationship was not, like real long-term relationship was not about kink at all. So when I was in that, I didn't really explore anything, didn't really do any of that. And I don't find kink a necessity. I can have a totally vanilla relationship. I don't. It's I mean, I would like to do kinky things. But
that's how I felt initially. But the longer I've been in kink, the less I've been able to tolerate something that I don't find as perfectly fulfilling. Like, if I'm not getting fulfilled by vanilla, it used to be I could manage, but now I'm realizing I don't want to have to manage without my sexual desire being fulfilled.
One of my love languages is quality time. So to me, it doesn't really matter what we're doing, whether it's vanilla or whether it's kinky. I prefer kinky. I like kinky, but to me, it's just about doing that with the person I'm with my partner. It doesn't.
It could be anything. Sex, it's about the time together.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cheesy, but I love that.
Well, excuse me.
Going into some of this, I had a very kind of odd situation for my first start into kink in high school, which wasn't a true introduction, I don't think, but it made any stepping and looking for a community after that a little harder. I was in a fairly kinky relationship in high school, but didn't know how to research, probably didn't want to research at the time. I was a stupid teenager. But after that, I kind of fell easier for the I don't want to say posers, but that's essentially what happened. Is like I was looking for another kinky relationship after that. There was one guy kept on saying he's done all this stuff, things like that. I started looking into more of it then. And then after we had gotten into a relationship, major red flag, he was still a virgin. He didn't even want to do any of that stuff he was talking up before.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of, I guess where I'm going with it, how do you pick those out? What would you guys say? How you would pick those out a little easier?
Once you've got a lot of experience, you can find the virgin in the room pretty fast. Because there's certain things in kink that you can't really describe them unless you've experienced them. And you can tell. I have definitely encountered in the Facebook community alone people who have described a sexual encounter in such a way that it's very obvious that they didn't know how to actually try it. They had definitely not done the thing they were talking about because they would have known, X, Y, Z if that were the case. Or, it was very obvious that they were being really exaggerative of what they were describing, because that's how it looks in porn sometimes. That's not actually how it works in person with a partner. Now that you've been more experienced and you have more life experience, it'll be a lot easier to catch when somebody's really talking out of their ass. The more research you do into kink, the more likely you are to be able to recognize when somebody's lying out of their ass or making things up as they go, because they may not actually be getting all the details of kink right. Or they may skip important steps like aftercare. You'll be able to notice when people are unaware of what they're talking about or deliberately being dangerous.
It's also about the communication too, because a lot of people will fake being about it because they think that's what's expected of them, and they're expected to be this experienced. They're expected to have been around and stuff like that. And I think, especially when you're new, you have to make it very clear, hey, I'm new. It's fine if you're new. Let's just, explore. Don't put any pressure on someone to already know things or already be educated and stuff like that. And make it clear that, you value, honesty, and you want to communicate boundaries, properly and stuff like that. And normally if there's no pressure on someone and, they're aware how much you value honesty, they're not probably going to lie to you. And, make it clear you're not judgmental about anything too. I try never to judge or have expectations for anyone ever, because it's just, it's a good way to get disappointed in any aspect.
And to be very, very clear, there's nothing wrong with being a virgin unless you're lying about it. Don't lie about being a virgin.
Ding, ding.
Don't lie about being not even just a virgin. Virgin is, of course, a construct, which doesn't actually matter. You don't have to lie about being a virgin in the positive. Like, you don't have to pretend to be a virgin. You're okay to have partners. But it's also really important that you don't lie and say you're more experienced than you are, because that just puts everyone in dangerous situations. Just tell me that you don't know what you're doing. We will work through it. But you have to tell me.
Yeah. And on top of all that, I mean, the only real thing other than just getting experience and spotting the virgin, as put it, and communicating clearly and, not having those expectations and, making clear that you value honesty and hoping the other person will be honest. It's just vetting, just getting to know someone the same as you would any friend. I mean, I don't think anyone would just, hey, I've known you for 2 days, let's start talking about kink to a friend, just as friends. It takes vetting to know someone's going to be chill with that. You know what I mean? Like say you do shrooms. You're not going to get to know someone for 5 seconds. Oh, hey, you want to drop a cap with me in the bathroom? That's like you don't even know what if they're undercover cop. Like, you vet someone in that same.
Let me tell you how many times somebody has said those exact words to me, and I've been like, "Who are you?"
Oh my God.
Look, you just haven't been to the right parties. Is what I'm saying.
Well, no, it's happened to me too. It's just
there you go. You don't accept drugs from strangers. Don't accept drugs from strangers.
You shouldn't be pulling teeth to get the truth out of somebody over something that shouldn't be that inconsequential.
Yeah, if somebody's lying to you about their status or experience level, they're going to lie to you about other stuff too. It's just going to happen. There's no reason for them to lie about being more experienced than they are unless they fully intend to lie to you about other things. They're telling you who they are. They're telling you that they're going to be a liar if you keep them around, and you should listen.
Which, yeah, and that's why vetting is so important, whether it's for kink reasons or even just for fucking friendship reasons, you know?
Oh, yeah.
There are plenty of people I just gotten to know a little better and then just decided, hey, I'm never going to speak to this person again. Yep. Just as friends, just because I don't appreciate them as people because they're bad. Yep. Well, I don't want to use the phrase bad necessarily.
Well, I have told this story about how I got to know somebody in the kink community. The more I got to know about them, the less and less I liked them, and the more and more concerned I got. And I was right to have been. I found out later. But it does happen. Like, you'll get into the community, you'll find somebody who you think is safe, who you think is awesome. But, you know, hopefully before you get into a scene with them and get hurt, you start to listen and you start to realize, you know, I don't really like this anymore. Like, I thought this sounded good, but the more I listen to this person, the more concerned I am, the less safe I feel. It does happen. And you should listen to that gut feeling. If you feel like something's not right, and leave. You shouldn't put yourself in a situation where you feel unsafe.
And once you get to the point where you're, you know, maybe trying to reach out and do things with someone else, you know, whether it's online and very impersonal and anonymous or whatnot, or in person, that's a big part of getting into kink is if something sets off red flags, turn around and go the other way. I'm not saying, you know, especially because if you're new to kink, you might not know what those red flags are. That's one of the biggest things. Yeah. That's why we talk so much about education.
You don't even need to know why you don't feel safe with that person. If your gut is telling you something's not right, listen to it. It's better to listen to it and be wrong than to put yourself in a dangerous situation when you had a feeling something was off.
And if you do discover at some point in the future, you're like, hey, I was unfairly biased, you know, that wasn't a red flag and I just didn't know, or I was confused or I was scared at the time. Yeah, there's nothing stopping you from turning around and apologizing to that person. Listen, we don't have to be friends. You don't ever have to talk to me again. I just want to let you know I'm sorry, but how I treated you, I was wrong. That's fine. But
the more I learn, the more I realize that I was wrong to make that assumption, but I didn't feel safe. The fact that you didn't feel safe is enough. That person probably won't even be mad at you. You just, if you don't feel safe, that should be the end of the discussion.
Yep. Just get the hell out of there. And that's probably one of the more important things, honestly, because there are a lot of walking red flags out there. And whether it's kink or just as friends or, you know, normal relationship, it's just, that's poof. Woo, boy, that's
look. If the person you're talking to suddenly starts to look a lot more like a festival of red flags, you know, maybe don't talk to that person anymore. It's a good sign to, like, maybe leave. I've had experiences very recently where somebody who I thought was pretty cool in the community, I started actually paying attention to what they were saying and how they were saying it. I was like, oh, I don't like that anymore. And I brought it up to somebody else. And as they read it and they took it in, they were like, oh, suddenly given this context and this level of understanding, some of the things I've seen previously also make me feel really unsafe having this person around.
Which is another reason.
Periodically get this sudden realization that makes you look back at other things and go, fuck. And if this happens, don't ignore it. That's your gut and your, you know, fight or flight response telling you, oh, I'm in trouble. I need to leave this.
Which is another reason why I wholeheartedly support, you know, trying not to have expectations towards people, because your expectations can color things negatively, but it can color things positively as well. Just because someone, you know, supposedly has a good reputation amongst, you know, other people you've met in the community, amongst, you know, other members of the community, or even among your own friends, if it's, you know, in person, you know, that doesn't mean they actually are good people. Don't set those expectations for people, right? Let people prove themselves, whether they're you know, lying about things or whether they're just not great people, you know, or maybe they'll be good people when you expected them not to be. Just if you don't have those expectations, just judge people on their own merit based on how they've treated you. And you're probably gonna be a lot better off than, you know, assuming everything's okay, because this is, you know, not everyone at a munch is going to be good, you know. You know, and just because they're at a munch doesn't mean they're going to be bad. You know, you have to judge people on their own merits. And
it's very important to realize too that just because somebody else had a wonderful magical experience with this person doesn't mean that your experience is going to be good. And if your experience is not good, you don't have to pretend that it was.
Yep.
That's the whole story. Like, just because somebody else had a positive experience doesn't mean that you have to pretend to have had a positive experience too, just because they did.
And that
Like,
doesn't
everyone's
necessarily
gonna have
mean
a
that the
different
person
experience.
that doesn't mean the person necessarily was bad either. It's just, you didn't click.
Oh yeah,
People can just
but
not.
it also could. It also
It
could.
could.
They
It
could have
absolutely
been putting on a mask for the other person. You never really know. It's the same argument if somebody assays somebody. Doesn't mean that they aren't a perfectly good person or a really good brother to somebody else. Just means that they are a piece of shit who committed SA. And that doesn't actually change the fact that they committed SA, but it also doesn't change the fact that they're probably a good brother to that person or to their siblings, or maybe they're a great partner to their partner. But they did still commit a crime against somebody else. Like, many things can be true at the same time. Just because somebody else had a great sexual experience with somebody doesn't mean that they will honor your consent and be safe with you. And you have every right to say something, and you should say something if you feel unsafe or violated.
Yep, absolutely. And then I guess really the final step, if once you've gone this far, if you're part of communities, if you're talking to people online, if maybe you found a partner, or serious or not, or if you just want to get more into the actual like experience of things, not necessarily going out and doing things with tons of people necessarily, but like if you just want to just be more engaged, I guess would be more like in-person actual events. So Munches is one. We mentioned Munches the other week. And most well, maybe if you live in a really small town, you're probably not going to get this, but most medium towns to large cities, they're going to have a community, and they do these things called munches. And munches are informal events. Usually they're not even directly kink related. Most munches, you'll just go to a normal restaurant, and it'll be just like a party event. There'll be reservations there. A lot of people that run munches will vet you before you can attend, depending on the munch. Not all of them are just completely open to people just walking in. Mm-hmm. And it's just going to be people who are open, or at least open amongst that community where they're holding the munch, open about the fact that they're into kink, and that's going to be everyone there for the most part. So you get a group of people, in real life that, might be nearby you, who are actually openly into kink and open to talking about it. And that doesn't mean, a munch event is all going to be talking. No, it's just a group of people all talking and hanging out. You might not even talk about kink at all for the entire munch. It's just these are people who are open up.
That just because a lot of those people there will be into kink doesn't mean that they're going to be into you, and you should not expect that.
That's also true. Yeah. Remember,
it's like you're munches and not necessarily meet anyone who is a potential partner.
Yep, it could be like a Star Wars fan meetup. It could be a meetup about anything. This just happens to be the community that this is based around is kink, but it's not just going to be that. And it's not going to be like, oh, everyone here is openly into each other.
My experience is it's a bunch of D&D nerds, and it's a D&D event as a munch.
Yep, that's quite common.
Yeah.
And
you go to the munch, and it's really just a cult to get you to join D&D clubs. That's all. They're luring you into sex now.
You gotta get those in you gotta get those in-person games going somehow.
They just needed that D&D game to go, so they just called it a munch instead. That's how they got you.
Yep. Hey, it happens. It happens. And hey, as someone who runs in-person games, sometimes you got to get them going as much as you can. Okay.
Look, I can actually 100% say that somebody has been lured into a munch with the promise of D&D. I can guarantee this has happened to somebody, and I really hope they reach out to tell me.
Which, ironically, I've always liked to do like an erotic D&D campaign. A group of people, that would be fun one day. Always imagined it.
Look, I have definitely seen admin pages talk about this before too.
Yeah, there's a good story in Literotica all about that I kind of enjoy, but that's besides the point. And then there might be munches that actually are themed and flavored towards being much more kink focused.
Some might be also really stuffy because it's the old guard. And the old guard tends
Yeah.
to be a lot more formal about things.
Yeah, that's very true.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes matches will take places in more private clubs, and there's other things going on, and it is.
Real quick definition check. Old guard.
Old guard, old people who are into kink. They tend to have different definitions, different ethical standards to some degrees. A lot of times, brats tend to be not very well appreciated by the old guard. They tend to see us as too similar to, or what is it, smart mouth masochists or smart ass masochists, Sams, I think they're called. That is like a relic of bratdom. We generally mostly see brats now, but I think SAMs used to have a lot less. SAMs, I think, just tend to be like a little bitchier in my experience.
It's slightly ironic you bring that up. Before like 2005, 2004, the whole tsundere trope in anime wasn't really a thing either. They didn't have those smart mouth brats. Yeah, it wasn't like a thing. It's really only in like this millennia that really bratting and bratty people have been looked on. No, it's just a thing. That's just a normal thing some people like to do, and there's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's
a lot of what I run into when I deal with the old guard is they find out I'm a brat and they're like, oh, you're just a shitty person. I'm like, well, actually, I'm really not that hard to deal with. Most of my bratting is malicious compliance and just being silly. I can be bitchy if you want me to, especially if you keep pushing me like this. But like, if you think that that's normal for brats, it's not. In fact, most brats will definitely crack down on it if we see somebody who's being bitchy for no fucking reason. That's not really how it works anymore, but a lot of the old guard doesn't necessarily understand that we do things a little bit differently than, say, a SAM would. It really depends. Like, I have met, I know Will and I had a whole conversation about the old guard, and we had differences of opinion on how they treated brats and how there tends to be a much more toxic viewpoint of brats in the older crew than there would be in other groups. If I were to go to a munch that was primarily early Gen X or boomers, they would probably not be a fan of the fact that I'm a brat. If I went to a younger group where it was, Zoomers and millennials, they probably wouldn't blink an eye. It's really interesting to see the dichotomy that exists there, because there has been a pretty big tone shift on certain topics between the old guard versus, the younger generation. And the reason I do call them the old guard is because they are palpably different when you're having conversations with them about kink. And in my experience, there tends to be a lot more formality there. There tends to be a lot more sir and a lot less daddy. There is not very many littles in the old guard. These are all things that are newer conventions that are very open and discussed and commonplace for us that they just weren't in the past. Would you agree with my description there, Will?
I would agree. And I'd say a large part of that has to do with, the internet culture. I've always said, age gaps nowadays mean a lot less than they used to, because, especially from like my generation down, because my generation was really, we kind of started with growing up with the internet. We're all part of the internet monoculture. We all see the same stuff on social media. We're all part of the same websites. If you're into kink, we probably see all the same kink websites for the most part. Like, so it's like I have a lot more in common with like Kat and Drow and other people than someone who's 15 years older than me, who was not part of the internet monoculture at any point and still doesn't really go on the internet all that much, I'm sure. They have very much that old guard attitude because they're not part of it. They don't understand it. They're part of that era where, the generational gap actually means something massive because they don't have that same shared perspective and point of view.
I would also say, like, this sounds a little mean. I don't really mean it to be mean, but think of it like the old guy shake his fist, get your kids off my lawn. That's the kind of energy I sometimes get from old guard, where they don't really appreciate that I'm a representative of conventions that didn't exist in kink in their day. And I don't know. Like, I personally don't mind old guard as long as they're not being fucking awful to me.
They're
but
like
sometimes been that there is a lot of judgment there. So I just don't necessarily always go to events if I know it's going to be predominantly old guard.
It's like the movie Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood, right? Clint Eastwood is the old guard, and Mouse is one of the Hmong neighbors that he really, 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 really doesn't like. And it's not that there aren't old guard that are open to new things and have no problems with new stuff. Like they're out there. They're absolutely out there. And there are people, especially if you've been in the kink community long enough, I feel like you,
I would say
at some point can't help but be more accepting.
Yeah, I would say there's even probably a majority of old guard who are very accepting, but they are overshadowed by the people, because we've all had, especially if you've been in the community a long time, you've probably had an experience with an older member of the community who was just fucking terrible to you. And there wasn't even a rhyme or a reason. They just they were mean to be mean for the sake of being mean.
Mm-hmm. I mean, happily, a lot of the experiences I've had, in person, there are like one-off munch events just run by people, but then there are also large kink, I don't know if I want to use the word organizations, but there are some larger organizations that, all just focus on running kink events and stuff like that. And I've had some pretty good experiences going to those. Mostly because they're more run by the younger crowd, in my experience. But then also they usually have established vetting procedures, and they run more than one kind of event. So like, hey, you're vetted for this munch, that also vets you for like all 6 of the different type of classroom, events that we have coming up. And that's a big thing. There's some organizations that run classroom events as well. It's not just munches and stuff like that. They'll run a munch one week, and then, hey, come back next week, and then we're going to do a self-tie class, and you can learn how to self-tie, from someone who's just been doing it for many years. And so especially if you find those big organizations, you can usually get involved in a lot of different things, and get to meet a lot of cool people, and learn, and hopefully learn a lot of cool things, because we all should always be learning, as we're involved in this.
I think it's one of the most important things to walk away from when you're getting into kink, is you don't just suddenly stop learning. And I mentioned this previously in classroom, just because I am established and have been in kink for a while doesn't mean that every often I won't see something and go, I haven't actually thought about that. I wonder what the implications of that are, and have to have a conversation with somebody who is in the community who I think might have had a similar experience or would have some insight. And being a member of this community, I can just, quote unquote, phone a friend and be like, hey, I just read about this and it seems like something you might be into. Can you give me a little bit of insight, or have you not heard of this either? And every so often they haven't heard of it either. And you know what happens? We both end up Googling it and talking about it.
Like sexy oogie.
There's sexy oogie boogie. Yeah, that was a whole thing we did. But with certain things, like there are kinks that are very uncommon, kinks that who have been in the community for a long time, have never heard of. And I hear about it and I'm like, is that a thing, or did somebody make that up? Because is that like an actual recognized kink?
It's always a thing.
Well, but the thing is, sometimes it's like they're using a term that isn't actually used by most people. And I'm just like, well, what the fuck is that? Or is this actually something people are into? Or is this person a one-off? Is this person an anomaly? Because there are people who have a kink that is just so weird that nobody else has ever mentioned it to me. And I sit there and I'm like, well, I haven't actually considered that. What are the implications of that?
That's kind of become my own little in-joke. Every time someone says they're into something, no matter how wild, it goes, okay, that's cool. That's cool that you're into that. No matter how wild, no matter how much of a joke they made it to be. No, that's cool. That's cool. I'm glad you're into that. I'm proud of you for being open about it.
I'm not going to be that. There's nothing that really weirds me out anymore, but sometimes I have to go make a face like, well, I hadn't actually considered that possibility. I guess you could. I mean, I'm trying to figure out the physics of it, but like, good for you. A+. Hadn't thought about that one, but I'm glad somebody did. Of course, somebody did.
And it's also important.
I had an extended conversation with somebody about docking, and then we got into a very heated conversation about why you shouldn't buy your docking toys from Shein.
Listen, docking is so much less fun than saber fighting. I don't understand why everyone just doesn't saber fight. That's like, get your friends together, do some saber fighting. I mean, come.
And yes,
be a good topic.
We know that nobody knows what we're talking about, and we encourage you to Google it at your own peril.
Well, hey, how else are you going to find out who the best duelsman is among your friend group? I mean,
That's true. That's true.
These
No, this all started because I was looking at makeup brushes on Shein, and I got suggested a whole set of like differently gauged docking toys, and I'm like, why the fuck is this in with the makeup brushes?
LMFAO. That's really weird.
The things you can find on Wish or Shein is wild.
Imagine if you didn't know what that was and had a life-altering experience finding out because of Shein.
I'm sure people have. Just as I'm sure people are going to do the same thing when they Google saber fighting. But then again, finding out who the best duelist is, right?
Some of us have been on the internet too fucking long.
No, well, helicoptering. I don't know. I guess that's got to be Kink to some.
Look. I have a whole story about the time that I was at a mail review and I was watching my coworker, who was very drunk, blissfully unaware that there was a man with a bandana tied around his member, helicoptering right by her ear, and she had no idea. And I'm sitting there looking at her like, do you not even feel the breeze? That's got to be like, you know,
not a very good helicopter.
Some air movement. Yeah, that's got to be creating some air movement because he's really aggressively spinning. And she's just blissfully unaware and looking at me, and I'm like, there is literally a dick right by your head right now.
Is there a name for like the tassel pasties and like doing the dance for that? That's like similar to helicoptering? Is it just...
Yeah, I don't think there's a specific name for it.
Oh, it's a missed opportunity.
I mean, I'm sure somebody's got terminology for it that you wouldn't expect.
But it's important to note that these events go from like smaller group things to like massive events too. I mean, Sexpo isn't really about kink, it's more about the sex industry. It's not more, it's about the sex industry, you know. There's just always also happens to be kinky stuff there, but you know, so whatever kind of scale of event you're looking to get engaged or involved in, once you're at that point where you feel comfortable enough to do so, you know, there's a lot of that. Like Penzik, the event that I go to over the summer, there's a massive gathering of kinksters there. There's huge, you know, 100+ you know, munches there, and then there's also massive parties with, you know, dungeons and St. Andrew's crosses and suspension play and all kind of fire cupping, all kinds of you know, kink stuff.
Anytime you go to a nerd associated event, there will probably be kink stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a law. Like if you go to the nerdiest of conventions, they will probably have some sort of kink event that you did not expect. Furry conventions, always kink stuff.
Tons of 18+ things going on at anime conventions. Gen Con has 18+ stuff. Comic-Con has 18+ stuff.
Oh yeah. You cannot exist in a nerd space without there being some kink discussion.
I read a story on Literotica a long time about someone going to a furry convention in a suit, and then they ended up doing stuff with their sister because it's a furry convention, and they were both wearing suits. And every time I think about someone doing things at a furry convention, I just think of that and go, ugh.
So I want to point out, this is the second time in this like less than hour period that you mentioned reading something on Literotica, and I feel like you're really tattling on yourself at this point.
I'm open about it. Literotica is a good site. What do you want from me? It's better than AO3. And I will not take that.
Don't you dare come for AO3 right now.
Listen, AO3 is meant for actual literature. Just because there's also a lot of erotica on there doesn't mean it's not primarily supposed to be a fiction, actual fiction side.
My Mass Effect smut and Dragon Age smut any day. Don't start.
And listen, that's the thing. Literotica is specifically smut. Not that there aren't non-smutty stories on there. They have very rarely been. There's a time loop story that kind of went famous that started on Literotica called Mother of Learning. I think that has an actual Amazon release now. If you're really into time loop, you know, fiction, you've maybe even read it. But no, Literotica is specifically smut. I have no problem.
Suggestions for BDSM related literature next? Is that going to be the next thing?
No. Like I said, Mother of Learning isn't really meant to be. It just has smut in it, but it's not really. It's an actual fiction, so I would include that. Now, would I include, you know, a short story maybe I wrote that might be on Literotica? Sure, absolutely.
Perfect. Oh,
Speaking of which,
21-year-old, or almost 21-year-old cat decided she needed to be held right now. So if you hear
of
her, I
course,
apologize.
well, she should. Well, she's never been fed food. She's never had attention. She's never had love before. So
She has suffered every day of her life.
That's right.
True.
That's right.
It's not like her diet isn't mostly treats right now. She's been refusing to eat anything else. So, you know.
Kat, do you think we've missed anything? You have any questions about anything? Anything, maybe we didn't cover?
No, honestly, from this episode, I've kept up pretty well with all of it. Yeah. No, I think we've covered essentially what I was talking about at the end of last episode. Yeah.
I feel like we've helped provide at least some means and direction on how to get into the community if you're starting out.
Yes. I also think maybe it might be a good topic to like talk about toys and like different things on getting into certain plays, because that is a good thing to talk about. Maybe Sheen isn't the best place to get certain things, but like I know I've bought one of those cheap little bondage kits from like Wish because I didn't want to spend $45 on a nicer one.
I think that's a great idea. I would argue that
until I knew what I liked from
nothing
it.
Internal, you'll probably be okay. But don't buy anything that's going to be internal from a site that doesn't have, a really good grade, at least linings. I think that would actually be a really good one, because then we could actually get into some of the bigger BDSM gear too, such as St. Andrew's crosses that a lot of people may be a little intimidated to discuss.
Yeah, we could make that the next episode if you guys are down.
Well, we could call it the Sex Dungeon episode.
Yeah.
Like what's actually in the dungeon.
Yeah, so that we could do that. So that's Friday the 19th of January, I guess, will be the next episode. And we'll talk all about that.
Okay.
I'm going to write it now in the Discord.
Oh, we're actually going to record it so we actually remember?
I am going to try.
So for those of us who don't know, we literally tell each other like 30 seconds before we come into the show what the topic is, because most of us have forgotten.
Yeah. You think we remember from the last 2 weeks that we last talked about it?
Look,
you want to know the only reason I know is because I Kat actually looked it up and then told me, because otherwise I didn't fucking remember. Okay, all right.
It took me so long. It took me so long to narrow it down. I'm just like, I think it's
we are honestly just on the ball. My favorite part is I often suggest the episode, and then somebody says, "Well, you suggested it." I'm like, I don't even remember what I had for lunch.
Yep.
What do you mean I suggested it? That means nothing to me.
It's okay, Mouse. We're old. All right. Just because Kat's young has an unfair advantage. All right. It's okay.
I have been this way since I was born. It has never stopped. I have no memory whatsoever.
You say that I have an advantage, but I literally replayed that part, the ending part of the video, like 4 times to find it and narrow it down, because the first 3 just, of course, over the head. I'm just like, yep.
Yeah. I forgot to pay attention to the right part. That's a mood.
Exactly. I'm just like, I focus in on certain parts, and I'm just like, oh yeah, we did talk about all this. Da 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 da.
Yeah. Yep. You start thinking about something that was said, and you go off in left field. And you're like, oh fuck.
Now I have no idea where I am in the recording anymore.
Yep. I do that all the time.
I think it's also bold of you to assume that we're going to remember to look at the private chat and find.
I will pin this shit.
Oh. Look. I absolutely, sometimes if I remember, will listen to the podcast from last week before we do this one, just so I remember what the fuck I said in the last one.
That's fair. All right, so we'll call it here. As you guys just heard, next episode will be Friday the 19th, and we will be talking about what's in the dungeon. I hope you guys enjoyed listening. As a side note, before we get the hell out of here, the Discord where this is hosted is a good place, good community to go find out some stuff if you're looking to get into Kink. And Mouse's as well, which I think might be linked in her socials potentially. But anyways, we will see you guys next episode. Have a good one. And this has been us. Good night.
Night.